everybody. It is Craig, Whispering Storyteller, and I hope you are well. So tonight, I recorded a video. Well, I think I recorded a video, and it was one of those moments where you realise afterwards, after spending a good hour and 20 minutes recording something, that it didn't record. I was devastated. So I've made a decision, rather than me go through that whole thing again, I'm just going to read a bedtime story to you. The video that I had done was movies that I would save, and I did science fiction. And I prepared a whole presentation, and I read through it, but never mind. I think because it needs to be a bit in depth, I will save that to another day, so I do apologise if anybody was looking forward to hearing that. But what I'm going to do instead is just do a short video where I tell you a nice story that will help you relax and help you unwind and hopefully just have a nice slumber. Okay. Now I'm going to be looking at the screen. So I'm going to be reading from the screen, so I might not be looking at the camera. But I do hope that's okay. I'm going to read to you a short story version of The Secret Garden by Francis Hodgson Burnett. A very famous story indeed, but this is a super short bedtime story. Once upon a time, there lived a little girl named Mary Lennox. Mary lived in India with her wealthy parents, but she was often left alone and grew up quite spoiled and unhappy. One day a terrible sickness swept through the house, and Mary's parents passed away, leaving her all alone in the world. Mary was sent to live with her uncle, a Mr. Archibald Craven, in a large gloomy mansion called Misselthwaite Manor, which was located on the moors of England. The manor was as lonely and sad as Mary felt. It was a cold, grey place full of dark rooms and long, empty corridors. The wind howled across the moors, and the house seemed to creak and groan with every gust. When Mary arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, she was met by Mrs. Medlock, who was a strict housekeeper, who explained that Mary's uncle was rarely home. He was a sad, mysterious man who spent most of his time travelling, and Mary was not to disturb him. Mrs. Medlock warned Mary to stay in her room or the gardens, but never to explore the many closed-off parts of the manor. At first, Mary was angry and bitter about her new life. She wandered through the halls of the manor, feeling bored and very lonely. She didn't like anyone and thought that nobody liked her. But then, something began to change. She started to notice the things around her, the wild, windswept moors, the strange sounds in the house at night, and the stories the servants whispered about a secret garden that had been locked away for many, many years. One day, as Mary was exploring the grounds, she met a friendly robin in the garden, and the robin seemed to take an interest in her, hopping around and chirping cheerfully. It was the first living thing that had ever shown her any kind of affection, and Mary felt her heart soften just a little bit. Curious about the secret garden, Mary began to ask questions. She learned that the garden had belonged to her uncle's late wife, who had loved it dearly, but after she had died, Mr. Craven locked the garden door and buried the key, refusing to let anyone enter. The garden had been left to grow wild, hidden away from the world, just like Mr. Craven's broken heart. Determined to find the secret garden, Mary searched the grounds day after day, and the more she explored, the more her spirits lifted. She even started to make friends with the people around her, like Martha, the kind-hearted maid, and Martha's brother Dickon, a boy who had a very special way with animals and nature. Dickon was full of life, always smiling, and he taught Mary about the plants and the creatures that lived on the moors. One afternoon, while following the robin, Mary made a wonderful discovery. The little bird led her to a secret door in a high stone wall covered in ivy. Now her heart raced as she brushed away the leaves and found the door's rusty old keyhole. The key, she realized, must be nearby, and after searching the earth beneath the ivy, she found it. It was a large old-fashioned key buried beneath the soil. With trembling hands, Mary inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click, and the heavy door creaked open, revealing the most magical sight that she had ever seen. Inside was the secret garden, overgrown and tangled, yet full of potential. Though it had been neglected for 10 years, Mary could see that it was still alive. The trees had twisted into beautiful shapes, and tiny green shoots were pushing their way through the earth, eager to grow. Filled with excitement, Mary decided that she would bring the garden back to life. She kept her discovery a secret and began to visit the garden every day, weeding, pruning, and planting new flowers. Soon she invited Dickon to join her, and together they worked in the garden, helping it bloom once more. With every day that passed, Mary grew stronger and happier, and the fresh air, the work, and the friendship that she shared with Dickon all worked their magic on her, and she became a kind and caring girl. But the secret garden wasn't the only mystery in Misselthwaite Manor. At night, Mary often heard strange cries coming from somewhere in the house. The cries were soft and sorrowful like a child's, and they echoed through the dark halls. When she asked about them, the servants would only shake their head and tell them that she was imagining things. One night, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Mary followed the sound of the cries. They led her through the winding corridors to a hidden room at the end of a long hallway. Inside, she found a boy lying in a large bed. Surrounded by pillows and blankets, he was very pale and thin with large, sad eyes. The boy's name was Colin Craven, and to Mary's surprise he was her cousin, and the son of Mr. Craven. Colin had been kept hidden away in the manor, believing himself to be terribly ill and unable to walk. His father, Mr. Craven, couldn't bear to look at him because Colin reminded him so much of his late wife. Colin was lonely and scared, just like Mary had been when she first arrived at the manor. Mary was determined to help Colin, just as she helped the garden, and she visited him every day, telling him stories of the outside world, of the garden and of Dickon's adventures on the moors. Gradually, Colin began to trust her, and his spirits lifted. He laughed for the first time in years, and Mary even convinced him to try getting out of bed and into a wheelchair so he could be wheeled around the house. One day, Mary told Colin about the secret garden, and he begged her to take him there. So with the help of Dickon, she secretly wheeled Colin through the house, out into the fresh air, and through the hidden door into the garden. Colin was amazed by what he saw: the vibrant flowers, the strong trees, the birds singing in the branches, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. In the weeks that followed, Colin spent every day in the garden with Mary and Dickon. They laughed and played and worked together, and Colin's health began to improve. He grew stronger, and one day he even stood up from his wheelchair and took his first steps in years. The garden was working its magic on him just as it had for Mary. As the garden bloomed, so did the friendship between Mary, Colin and Dickon, and the once lonely and sad children were now filled with hope and joy. And as they grew happier, the entire atmosphere of Misselthwaite Manor began to change, and the once gloomy and dark house now felt warm and full of life. But the greatest change of all was in Mr. Craven. Far away from Misselthwaite, he had been wandering, lost in his grief. Then one night he had a dream of his late wife, who told him to return to the manor and go to the garden, and when he woke, he felt a pull in his heart. He wanted to go home. When Mr. Craven returned to Misselthwaite Manor, he was very surprised to see how much had changed. The servants were happier, the house was filled with light, and there was laughter in the air. He followed the sound of children's voices to the secret garden, and what he saw there just took his breath away. There, in the middle of the garden, was Colin, his son, standing tall and healthy, surrounded by flowers and by sunshine. Mary and Dickon were beside him, and all three were glowing with happiness. Mr. Craven's heart was filled with joy, and the sorrow that weighed him down for so many years began to lift. With tears in his eyes, Mr. Craven walked into the garden and embraced his son Colin, who had longed for his father's love, and he hugged him back tightly. Mary watched with a smile, knowing that the garden had brought them all together, healing their hearts just as it had healed the earth. From that day on, the secret garden was no longer a secret. It became a place of joy and beauty where Mary, Colin and Dickon spent their days growing and thriving amongst the flowers and the trees. Mr. Craven too found peace and happiness in the garden, and Misselthwaite Manor became a warm, welcoming home filled with love. And so the garden that had once been locked away and forgotten became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, new life can grow and happiness can be found once more. And they all lived happily ever after. Good night, sleep tight, and I will see you soon.